Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adoctorsjourney Podcast, navigating life and medicine with coaching and healthcare innovation. And I am your host, Miguel Villagra, certified physician, life coach, and positive intelligence coach. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Jonathan Fisher, who is a Harvard-trained cardiology, a main speaker, author, and now author of a book. I get to know Jonathan at the Innovator MD World Conference in 2020. He was one of the main speakers, and I just going to mention how transformative his lecture was. And I'm very grateful of having here as a guest. He's going to share his journey. But before I keep going, Jonathan, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Miguel. What a treat to be here with you. And that Innovator MD conference was awesome. And I'm doing well. I'm in a transitional phase. I have 3 teenagers, and one of them is off to college in a few weeks. So really interesting times here.
So you are a very, very busy man. So at Adoctorsjourney, we try to focus on reaching our goals, our destination, while being present and enjoying the journey. And oftentimes, having and hearing stories about physicians, entrepreneurs, and leaders in healthcare as you are, it becomes can even spark inspiration for our audience. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey, where you're coming from, a little bit of your history?
Medicine is in my blood. I am the youngest of 7 children, and we are all physicians. And I think there was one family that had more physicians in it, and that was a guy named Guyton, who wrote my physiology textbook. And I think he had 12 children who all went into medicine. My dad was the town doctor for a small suburban New Jersey town, and my mom was a nuclear physicist and a professor. And we grew up in a very academic household. The oldest child went on house calls with my father. That was the doctor's bag, the leather doctor's bag back there that they used to bring with them. So it was very natural that I would be intrigued by medicine, by healing, biology, physiology, really curious about how the body worked and when things went wrong and how we could heal them again. And my journey was pretty straightforward. I took a very aggressive academic path, trying to be the best academically in high school and then in college. It turned out I did fine. I got all the accolades. I went to the best programs. And yet the more success that I achieved by outward measures, the less happy and more unhappy I was internally. And it really took a few crises in my life to try to start asking the question of where did I get off the track of living according to a direction that would make me feel satisfied. And that was the beginning of the process about 15 years ago. And it was a combination of a loss of a loved one, worsening anxiety, loneliness and isolation, depression. And so it through a whole number of processes and introspection and seeking help outwards, I eventually decided that it was going to be part of my life's work to help fix the healthcare system that was partly responsible for me not living a full and good life.
Thank you for sharing. And what resonated with me in coaching, we always teach physicians about this concept of the arrival fallacy, right? We keep setting new milestone, and we feel that when we reach that milestone, everything is going to be great, fulfilling, and joyful. And unfortunately, oftentimes, if we get to that point, it wears off fairly quickly. And then you get the next milestone, but you ignore the fact that when you reflect back in time, you are missing a lot of moments and time just for not being present. But I think I want to piggyback on, because I want to talk about the organizational level of burnout as a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. But oftentimes we don't focus that much on the individual level, and the status quo in medicine is we're meant to be warriors no matter what. And oftentimes we see even having issues and struggles such as depression, anxiety, burnout as weakness. So, and I'm very outspoken about how I struggled with anxiety and burnout in the past, but I know that your story has resonated a lot of me about your specific struggle with anxiety and depression. And I want to see how can you tell me more about how was that process of being more open, outspoken about these, and what did you do to get yourself some help?
I appreciate the work you're doing. And the one revelation that really moved me as I started to share some of my own stories, and I was very afraid early on. I started sharing my personal experience about 5 years ago, and I was afraid that my patients would find out, that my colleagues would think less of me, that I might lose my license because I had sought mental health, and I had to get interested in the policies, national policies that are punishing physicians for having common problems like anxiety and depression. And as you asked the question, you said, when did you start opening up? And I think the answer is I didn't start opening up to other people. I started opening up to myself. I think I had gotten so effective at checking off the lists when I would do my morning rounds on my third-year medical school surgery rotation, and almost to the point of being like a soldier, where I wouldn't ask for a bathroom break, and I would be terrified of making a mistake or saying the wrong word, and I was afraid of attendings who would watch the way we presented, and they really judged us on perfection. And so opening up to myself meant I began by journaling, just writing to myself, privacy, about what I was really facing and how unhappy I really was. And then, fortunately, for so many of us, we have one person that notices. Just one person is all it takes. And for me, that was my sister, Andrea, who noticed. She noticed that I wasn't happy anymore. I wasn't fun. I wasn't loving to other people. I seemed to be in pain. And she gave me the courage to seek help from a psychologist, which it's funny now, but if you were to look back, I was terrified. Even making the appointment, I need help because I'm just struggling. I felt like it was a sign of weakness, like you were saying. So I spent a year in therapy as a medical resident, and I did that in secret because I didn't want anyone who worked in the hospital to see that I was going to the office, because I personally thought there was something very wrong with me. I had a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of embarrassment, and I was hiding this from everyone, and that helped a lot, and it was just the first step. And then I realized that I needed to continue practices every day. Otherwise, I might slip back into patterns of real worry and anxiety and sadness and assuming the worst. So I discovered the field of positive psychology and the skill of optimism, and this idea that so many of us in healthcare, we weren't born hopeless, but we work in a system for long enough that we learn to become hopeless. It's an important concept. And so the opposite is true. We can teach ourselves to question our doubting thoughts, question our hopelessness, take back some agency and control in small corners of our own lives. And then part of the process, this is the end of the question, the end of the answer, part of my process of healing and then becoming a leader and making sense of it all was to share with other people once I had done some of the work. And so I shared slowly with colleagues in healthcare, one by one. I started leading programs in my own system, eventually leadership retreats for the entire cardiothoracic division, 75 surgeons and cardiologists 5 years ago, and teaching them about these skills. And then, interestingly, after these programs, people come up to me, some of them after the talk, but some of them in private, saying, I never knew that other people suffered the way that I am. How can I get help?
I love it. I love it. I think that awareness is the first step. See what is looking inside, what's going on in there. And you sometimes see it coming. You have these symptoms and you just ignore them once again, because the status quo is we're built to be soldiers, right? And we're in war. So no matter what happened to us, we keep moving forward. But I do want to touch base, because what I love about your work, Jonathan, is that you focus on individuals. You're a coach, you are a mindful trainee and facilitator, but you also worked with organization. And I think that's a topic that it becomes a little complicated, and oftentimes even a topic that people don't even want to talk about, right? So what can we do at the more systemic level? And I want to see what your thoughts are.
I appreciate how you framed it and the complexity there. It is very complex because healthcare is complex. It's one of the most complex industries that exist, except maybe aerospace. There's so many policies that work on national levels, and there's guidelines and hospital policies and laws. And then we have individual doctors who just get law, almost like widgets, like little pieces, cogs in a machine, where we don't feel like anyone's caring for us. The first thing I'll say is that doctors are not taught about how the system of healthcare works. At least I wasn't. When I went to Mount Sinai in 1998, 97, there was no single lecture about how healthcare works. And so I thought that was very strange. I spent years, thousands of hours studying neuroanatomy, cardiac physiology, and I was going to go spend the next 50 years of my life working in a business, but nobody taught me how it worked. So I want to point that out up front, that there's a lot of pressure on doctors to become leaders, and often we're told to become leaders. without requisite training. Whereas on the flip side, healthcare is a very backwards industry because unlike so many other industries, those that are leading the organizations, the corporations, are not people who have grown up and done the work themselves, not physicians themselves. Now, healthcare systems that are run by physicians or groups of physicians having a say are more successful. We know this. So we have a physician who is very skilled in one thing, but it's not the business of healthcare. And then we have a whole nother class of people who are trained in the business of administration and healthcare without understanding kind of the core piece, which is the heart-to-heart connection of doctor and patient. So that's part of the complexity. And we need to explore and expand how we educate medical students about healthcare and encourage them not just to be clinicians, but to see how they may want to become leaders somehow in the space. And unless we tap into the skill and knowledge of physicians to begin to lead our organizations, we're going to continue to have this disconnection here.
Now, one of the things that resonate with what you're saying is the fact that oftentimes we in healthcare work as silos, that we're not connected somehow, and not only within the team, but the people, the administration, etc. And sometimes we need to open those bridges of communication. But in addition to that, I have seen, and you are in a space where you can see those trends, more and more awareness about burnout, about something needs to be done. But oftentimes I see that we're still lagging behind compared to how much burnout physicians are suffering. But at the same time, I see in a lot of academic areas where there is all these resources, but when you get to smaller groups, smaller hospitals, frontline providers are still not, those resources are not available to them. And we always, oftentimes, when I see a lot of healthcare innovation, that we discuss this a lot in this podcast, I feel it's amazing, it's cool, but there's still this gap, right? When this is going to be available to the frontline providers, ER hospitals, etc. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You pointed to one interesting divide between large organizations that may have more resources and smaller organizations that maybe don't have a chief well-being officer or a whole department, as my system has, that is committed to analyzing the top 10 pain points of physicians, nurses, and APPs, and committing resources at an organizational level to shift the way that day-to-day operations happen. The original focus on burnout was teaching yoga and teaching meditation, and I am a fan of these things. In fact, I teach these things. But this can't be the only solution, and it can't be a Band-Aid. It has to simply be an offering for those individuals who want to do some of the individual work while we are also working at an organizational level. Now, you came at this for a conversation from innovation. The discussions around innovation in healthcare are fascinating. I'll be speaking at the NextMed Health Conference in San Diego. We're talking about the future of medicine. The problem is that the factors that will help fix our healthcare system are not fixed by technology alone and not fixed by innovation. In fact, the opposite. In order to fix healthcare, we have to go back to some basic core values that have always been the underpinning of health and care for thousands of years, since Hippocrates and since Galen. And that is not future technology, that's past technology. And the technology is, can we strengthen our empathy as leaders, as business leaders? Can we strengthen compassion? Can we learn to communicate effectively and assertively? Can we learn to work collaboratively instead of in competition? These are how organizations heal themselves. And I think the answer for me in the work that I'm interested in has to do with creating a healthy culture. And if you wanted to grow something in a petri dish, you would look at the medium that you're developing it in. And that's where we have to focus. What is the culture we're growing our medical students, our residents, even our nurses in? And I think technology can help offload some of the burdens, whether it's generative AI that's ambient listening in the exam room and creating notes so there's less dictations, etc. We can help with AI assistance of the billing and offload the clerical work that so many physicians are burdened by. That's part of it, but you could do all of that and it still is going to leave us with the crisis of burnout, which is driven by really a disruption of core human factors and needs that are no longer at the center of healthcare, which have to do with the individual's need for autonomy, our collective need for belonging, and the need for each individual to feel like they are practicing and functioning at their personal best, and they're growing throughout their career.
I love it. I love the way you frame it. And that kind of inspired me to the next topic that I want to discuss with you, because I want to touch base on your book. But before we get to that point, I know you are a UK certified mindful facilitator, right? And as we work on building all these bridges, all this innovation, what tips do you have for those healthcare providers that are currently taking care of those patients, 60% plus burnout rate physicians in United States? Any tips, any thoughts, anything that you have to say to them?
From a mindfulness perspective, for those people who already practice mindfulness, and there's a lot now, 10 years ago, it was only about 8 to 10% of Americans had a regular mindfulness or meditation practice. And now the number is twice that. But still, it's relatively unusual for physicians to do these practices. When I lead retreats for physicians, they come back to me and say, this changed their life. The simple practice of developing the skill of complete and total presence in the moment, noticing when our mind is wandering, when we're projecting past experiences from another patient or another person onto the person in front of us. We are living in a reactive mode rather than a proactive mode from our core values. And so the next way that I would answer your question is to say it depends on where the individual is on their own spectrum of burnout and total flourishing, human flourishing. Because I don't like giving a one cookie cutter message, because you can give a message to one group and they'll say, that doesn't apply to us. So if a physician is completely burned out and they're literally the rope is burning at both ends and there's very little left, that's a very different solution. The recommendation that I would give there would be, first of all, simply to provide a compassionate listening ear. So often, we don't even spend time and just let physicians speak. We rush through our meetings. We tell them, don't complain. We tell them, if you don't like it, go find a job somewhere else. And so the beginning of the process of healing has to be one individual, or even better, a group of caring physicians, of community of peers, maybe people who are already further along on the spectrum of well-being that can help lift up our colleague and just acknowledge, I know what you're going through. I've been there. And on the other hand, if we have physicians who are not struggling, are not burning out, in fact, they're really enjoying their lives, then it's a conversation that's more good to great. Okay, you're doing well, your practice is going well, you've got some work-life balance. I know what can really help even more with your personal satisfaction and success. Do you see your colleague suffering over here? Are you willing to help? Are you willing to lean in? And whether that's on a local level or on a policy level or on a national level, not asking for a lot of time, but what can the physicians who are flourishing do to actually help the system and to leave a legacy where we leave the system better off than we found it?
That is fantastic, and the perfect segue to talk about the book. You wrote this book, Just One Heart. And when I talk to authors, what fascinates me is, how can you write a book while doing all the remaining of things in your life, from family, professional matters? How can you spark creativity within the chaos of our everyday life as physicians, in your case, cardiology, father, etc.?
I would say that just like becoming a doctor, I would not encourage anyone to become an author unless they already have some deep burning inside of them that's pulling them to create this work. Because without that burning, there's no way we can write a book in a week or in a month or in 6 months. We can write a book for vanity. We can write a book for the mass consumption. But if we want to invest time, and the typical book takes about 2 years to write, and that's how long mine took from start to finish. I spent 1 year on research and early drafts and 1 year purely on editing and revisions. It has to come from a very deep place of curiosity, of service, of contribution. And for me, and a lot of authors that I know, it's part of our own process of healing from the burnout and from the stress, because we're looking back and we're creating a coherent sense of our own journey. No longer is our life defined by the healthcare system, by the medical school we went to, by the rotations we did, by the grades we got. Suddenly, when we write a book, we are now becoming authors, not just of the book, but we're putting our whole life, and this is mine is partly a memoir, but mostly it's helping other people. If it talks about our own life, we start to create a coherent narrative And in the psychology literature, that's one of the most important factors in personal well-being. When you think back about all the high and low points in your life, can you put them into a coherent story that explains where you are now and where you're going?
Fantastic. If I ask you, what is the core message of your book, what would that be?
The core message is that the way we approach health in our society is fractured and disconnected. And that is the reason why we are not moving towards total and holistic health. And the core message is that instead of thinking about the body as a physical form and thinking about the mind as a psychological activity, we simply have to remember what has never been forgotten in Eastern traditions, whether it's Taoism or Buddhism and other wisdom traditions, which is there is actually no separation between what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're believing, and the physical state and health of our heart and also our other organs. And when we remember that there is just one heart, there is not, I have an emotional heart and a spiritual heart, and then socially we refer to our heart, we use the heart emoji, and then spiritually we talk about the heart of God, the heart of religion. If we look at the current science, we find out there's research showing that when we live with integrity, that we honor all dimensions, these 4 dimensions of our heart, the physical, emotional, social, and spiritual, we can accelerate healing at scale, which is what I'm hoping that we can do.
Fantastic. Now, at the going back to the individual level, because that's one of the main focus we have, we always talk about having a more holistic approach, right? So, and so oftentimes in healthcare or physicians are like, what does that even mean, right? So where do I get started? How broad I can open up my horizon of possibilities and things I need to do. So how will you break it down when you talk about the individual, considering the concept that you have shared on your book?
It's like an accordion. There's a very high-level answer that I'll give you to this, and then there's deeper and deeper levels. But at a high level, if someone is wanting to know how they can become a better physician or a better husband or a better wife or a friend, we want to take a holistic view. And in coaching world, we use what I think is a complicated model, which is called the Wheel of Life, where we talk about these 8 dimensions. There's how are you financially and professionally and spiritually? And that's a wonderful tool that's helped me. I'm a cardiologist, and so I realized that these all boil down to 4 dimensions of the way we talk about our hearts. So if we just care for the physical heart, which means every day, am I moving my body? Am I nourishing my body with a plant-based, plant-forward diet? Am I nourishing my emotional heart? So in other words, am I aware that I'm stressed out? Am I taking activities each day to walk outside, listen to music, meditate, pray? The 3rd dimension of the heart that is very practical, very realistic about how we can approach each day to live a full and good life is our social heart. And we know from all the research, whether it's the Blue Zones research from Dan Buettner or Dr. Ornish's research or Waldinger's research on the Harvard study of happiness, we know that the number 1 predictor of how long and we live is not our diet and it's not our exercise. It's our social connections. And physicians and nurses and those of us in healthcare have pushed that aside for too long. And if we have to focus each day on nurturing the social dimension of our heart. And then lastly is something that's a taboo subject. And I think it's something that we're going to see a pendulum swing in our society backwards. And that's the 4th dimension of the heart and the spiritual piece of the heart, which many people say, oh, don't talk about spirituality. Doctors are scientists. That's part of the problem. We've medicalized the human body so that we only approach it in a physical sense. Most of our patients want us to acknowledge that spiritual life, whatever that means for you, it could be connection to a God or a higher power or a purpose, a legacy, volunteering. It's simply a connection between ourselves and something much bigger, beyond the mundane day-to-day life. And if we address these 4 dimensions of the heart each and every day on an individual level, we end up in a much better place.
That's beautiful. Not only a better place individually, but as a society in general. And definitely we need that. Is there any message that you want to share, like as we wrap up the episodes with the audience that is currently watching you, Jonathan? Any message of any physician out there that is hearing and seeing us right now?
There is always, no matter how bad things are, there is always hope. So for those physicians who are struggling, and now that's more than 50% of physicians in the US, similarly globally, you may believe that there's nothing more that can be done, that everything is all talk and no change is happening. I can tell you that I've studied the progress that's been happening over the last 10 years. And we began with a lot of talk about burnout. We began with a lot of initiatives, which were somewhat superficial, maybe like a pizza party or a yoga class. And then just in the last 5 years, there's been a real national movement, and the Surgeon General is paying attention to it. Hospital systems now are incorporating metrics of physician well-being, which the executive pay is being tied to. And now as we see incentives being connected with actual healthy cultures of well-being, change is happening. And if you feel like you are needing help, simply have the courage to reach out. And my message and the message of the book, Just One Heart, is that there are very practical steps we can take to recover our sense of hope, take back control of our own lives, and eventually become leaders and change makers in the system.
Dr. Jonathan Fisher, I am very grateful of having you here, sharing all this wisdom and something that is very relatable. We need to humanize medicine and healthcare in general. And I love that message has resonated with me and how people can get connected with you.
I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can look up my name, Jonathan Fisher, MD. And across social media, if you Google Happy Heart MD, all one word, you'll find me on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. And you can find my book on Amazon, Just One Heart.
Fantastic. And we're going to add those links to the description of the episodes. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next time.